Welcome guys, this is Stoplight 101. We're going to do a live demo here with a solutions consultant, and this is a great place to start doing design first, whether you're new to Stoplight or have been using it for a while already. My name is Evan Lee. I work in sales development here at Stoplight, and on the call with me, I also have Stefan Price. He's our solutions consultant. He'll walk you through all the technical stuff that we need to go through today. Now, for our agenda, first we're going to do a little housekeeping. I'm going to go through the Stoplight overview. The demo is scheduled to last about 45 minutes long, and we'll be recording that demo and emailing that back to you guys in case you have to drop out for any reason by the end of the week. So I'll give a brief overview of what we do here at Stoplight. Then Stefan's going to demo the product and walk through all these bullet points. And then we'll have time at the end for 15 minutes of Q&A, in which I recommend you put those questions into the Q&A. One person's already done it so far. Feel free to do that along as we go, okay? All right, so we have a lot of open source projects you guys might know of that do a lot of linting and mocking of APIs, but when it comes to our paid products, we're best known for our API lifecycle management platform that brings order to the chaos of API silos, duplicate endpoints, and wasted time. So what we're about to demo today is called Platform, our newest iteration, and Stefan's going to show you all the cool things that it can do to manage your API from the beginning to the end. So at this point, I'm about to hand it off to Stefan to explain what makes API design first so much more easier in Stoplight. Stefan?
Thanks a lot for that, Evan. That was a great intro. And also, thank you to everybody that's here today. I'm glad to see we have such a large audience. And what you're seeing on screen now is a diagram that is meant to abstract workflows that are very common when organizations are using OpenAPI. There we go. It looks like the image is corrected a bit. So it's meant to describe a code first and a design first workflow. Very often, I speak to users of Stoplight, our customers, every day, and they'll have at their organizations, they might have one team that's built around a code first project, and then other teams or projects are following a design first type of approach. Our platform is compatible with both, and I like to talk about how they differentiate from each other and what would be the strengths of a design first approach, which is something that a lot of organizations want to do, but they find that they struggle getting there. So our platform has been built to make that process a lot easier. Let's start with code first. Let's start with code first. If you notice there at the bottom, we have a diagram that starts with the planning stage, and you'll have somebody that can represent the interests of the business. So very often you'll have a product manager that can articulate what the business will need from their APIs, new endpoints, new services. Very likely there's always a business objective that's driving all of that. So they'll be able to articulate what's needed and potentially write it into a document. It could be a Google Doc or a Word document that can be shared with developers, and we'll let them know what they should build. So then it's up to developers to interpret that information, build the APIs, and well, you're going to need to describe the API so people can use it. So very often they will export OpenAPI from the code base by way of annotations. You can also export Markdown from comments. The objective here is that you're going to describe what the API can do so people can use it. Not every organization does this. This is something that you can achieve with our protocol Spectral, and that's to have a style guide in place, which would use the Open API that has been exported to make sure that it complies with your organization's own requirements, such as are we defining paths according to a standard pattern? Like maybe we'll use Pascal casing for paths. And we would like to do so that our users can write generic code a lot easier than having to experience too much variability from one API to another. So the style guide will surface any kind of warnings or errors. And once it passes, you can then add additional documentation and have an API product that is ready to be used. What's challenging with this workflow is that it's harder to change course and react to feedback because it's describing what's been implemented already. So it's more difficult for this to be adaptable to feedback. And if you look at the design first workflow at the top and contrast what this is doing, you're actually writing the open API first, and it's behaving more as a contract. In this process, you'll have an API designer. Now, not every organization has a job role that's called API designer. Very often, API designers will be product managers, software architects, developers, analysts as well. It's an individual that can write open API and explain what the business requires in that format. Our tooling will help you get there. Whether you're already are a developer and familiar with Docs as code workflows, or you're not, you'll find that the studio editor that we provide will help you get there a lot faster, especially at scale. So anyways, what you're doing here is articulating what the business needs and having the style guide to give the designer feedback as early as possible so that the designer, when they're writing the open API, will know if it's complying with company requirements. And once they have a valid document, they will then be able to hand that document to a front end team, and they can benefit from mock servers. So what they can do with the mock server is simulate what the API will do, start building out the front end. They can gather feedback about their job. They might tell the designer, we need additional fields in this response, and maybe we need another parameter for this endpoint, and give you early feedback such that by the point that you're ready to actually build the backend, it's been vetted by these different stakeholders. You can use the open API to generate code, server stubs, so very useful for that job as well. And you'll likely also want to make sure that whatever was built matches what the contract was describing. So there's a lot of testing tools out there. Our Prism product can help you perform contract testing. So making sure that a production server, a staging, or even developed server is returning the kind of responses that the open API contract is describing. And as you saw before, you would then write additional documentation and you have an API product. Don't feel that your team needs to have all of these roles, by the way. These are just, it's an abstract way of looking at this, but it could be filled in. All these stages could be performed by different people. What really matters is what tools are we giving to our team so that we can replicate this type of behavior, have success with design first. And if you notice, you'll be able to get feedback earlier and have better alignment with what the business requires and manage that change by way of the contract. So you can think of this as being a more scalable approach to developing APIs. Evan, can you go to the next slide? So this is more of a framework or concepts that I think are useful for you to know before we dive into the product. This diagram right here abstracts the Stoplight Workspace. Stoplight is a SaaS platform. If you haven't already, I would definitely encourage you to try a workspace. You can try it for free on our website. And the workspace can be broken down into the following components. If you look at the top left, we have a designer called Studio. And you'll see that Studio can help you articulate whatever's been occurring in the planning stage, and it will allow users to write open API files, describe schemas, and also write and enforce those style guides. It can be useful to a lot of individuals. And the Studio editor will also make it easier for all of these personas to use Git. So why would you want to use Git? And this is something that you may or may not be already doing, but if you have a Docs as code workflow, you will benefit from a lot of there'd be a lot of features that you would benefit from if you're using Git for API design and documentation, mainly in that you will be able to support a review process that uses Git. So if your developers are already familiar with Git, and you know that you need to document those APIs and manage their change over time, then you can use branching and pull requests and merging to be able to handle how that API will evolve. And that Git infrastructure will be your source of truth. So if you have any other integration needs, maybe other teams need those files, they'll always be there. Now, the Stoplight Workspace is built around you bringing your own Git. You'll be able to decide if you're using GitHub, for example, or GitLab. Then we have native integrations for all of those providers, and it's under your control, so those files will always be yours. The idea is that we are helping people that may not be familiar with Git be able to use that infrastructure effectively, and also enabling people to be able to describe APIs in a format that many times is difficult. It's been a bottleneck. And once you've done that, you'll notice that we have this develop and export boxes in between. If you're exporting Open API from your code base, and you're likely also using Git, maybe it's the same repository as the project itself. That's fine. You can push that content into the Stoplight Workspace as well through a CI pipeline. So there's a few options in there, but to keep it simple, I'd say that the native Git integration is the one that's appropriate for most teams. And yeah, you'll have developers that will benefit from having that open API because they can generate server stubs, they can perform contract testing. And on the right, we have that manage box, and that describes the kind of features that you will benefit from after adding the project to Stoplight to have documentation. So you'll have API docs. Users will be able to log into the workspace, look at those docs, use mock servers, generate sample requests. There's a catalog that will organize your documentation and make it more discoverable. And there's additional stuff in there that you may find useful, such as versioning, how to version your documentation, how to manage access settings. Maybe some projects are fully public and others are internal, but a partner needs access to those API docs. So you'll be able to handle who can access those resources with built-in authentication and role-based access controls. So there's a lot of features that will be useful for you to know about on the workspace. The goal on this webinar as a 101 webinar is so that you're aware of what they are and how to use them. So that's a great way to set the stage for the actual demo. I'm going to start sharing my screen right now so you can look at my workspace. Evan, can you see my screen all right?
Yep, you're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right. So what you're seeing is my Stoplight Workspace. It's called the API Guild. I built this workspace and I've been maintaining it for my own personal work and to share it with people like you who are interested in learning more about the platform. What you can think of a workspace, a Stoplight Workspace, as an environment that will help organize your internal efforts around API documentation and design. So a place where different internal users can log in, edit these files, be able to evaluate what they look like once they've been published. But since it's hosting your documentation, it's also a portal that will be able to provide docs for different stakeholders, and they may be fully external. You may have a need for external API docs. We can provide that functionality as well. So it's definitely a very dynamic and broad scope of what you can do with a workspace. This landing page that you see here in the center of the screen is something that you can customize, so you can add your own logos and images. That's what you've seen in my example. If you have an existing workspace, that's why it looks different. And that would be the first tip that I'd have to share with you on this call is customize your landing page. Own it. Add your own logos. Make sure that it's branded, that it represents what your company is doing. And yeah, it always helps to have somebody that is visual and creative to do this kind of stuff. I kind of enjoy it. So you've noticed that's what I built. The workspace is also paying a lot of attention around discoverability. That's something that I hear all the time. Very often, our users, our customers, in the past, they struggled with having many APIs, but then internally, people don't know about them. They're not resources that everybody is aware of, and you might have a team that will go and build something very similar to an existing API. It's incredibly frustrating. You put all this work around building something, and maybe the docs aren't very great, or they're not easily found, and somebody will go and build something very similar. So very frustrating. One way to avoid that is to have search functionality that's very handy right here at the top. If you're a user that needs a list of devices and you don't really know where to find it, then you can type in a search, you can type in a query, and as a result, they will direct you towards APIs, endpoints that match those results. So a very specific endpoint right here. Articles as well, any Markdown articles. So you can think of this as a way to help your end users know what you have. The left-hand section of the screen contains the projects I've been working with, so different docs. Some of them are APIs, others are more like guides. Since you can write Markdown, you can really document anything you want on Stoplight. And I'll show you that example, but let me get to my second tip before I do that. And that would be, if you have a workspace and you created a user, you'll find your username here at the bottom. And if you click on it, it will give you a few options. I want you to look at the account settings first. And this is significant because, well, there's some basic settings here, but what I want you to know is that there's a connected accounts tab, and this will make sure that you are using Git as a user. If you haven't done so, then please come to this tab and click on connect on any of the Git integrations that you'll be leveraging. And why is this useful? Well, it's a way to authenticate into the workspace. You can log in with your Git account, and that's pretty seamless, but it will also let you use that native Git integration that works this way. So second tip is make sure you're connected to your Git account. And once you've done that, you'll notice there's a plus button here on the top left. So if you click on that plus button, it will take you to the add a project screen. Now, this is very important because if you remember the diagram I talked about earlier that said, hey, you can use Git to be the glue that drives everything, that will be that infrastructure that will let people collaborate and review your API designs. Well, I can find GitHub. That's what we use at Stoplight. And you'll notice that I'm looking at the Stoplight org. I can change orgs or look at my personal account. And once I do so, these are the repos that I have access to as a user, so I can add them to Stoplight to document them. When I do that, I also have the option of installing webhooks. Usually this is something that you will want. And what they do is the webhooks will sit on the repository. And if you update the repo, say you have a branch that's documented in Stoplight and you push an update into one of those files, then the webhook will execute and keep the docs on Stoplight up to date. So we're in sync with the repo. And that means that a user has come to this page, use Git to document their APIs and set up automation with just a few clicks. This is brilliant. I mean, if you're thinking about, hey, I'm working at a large company, we need to support users that have different levels of familiarity with these type of tools, and they certainly can't set up automation themselves, but we wouldn't want our engineers to have to support them all the way. We want our engineers to focus more on the implementation. Then this is fantastic because it helps people get there. Now, it's not the only option. You can use other options to add documentation into Stoplight. One of them would be, let me import an open API file that I have on my local desktop, or create a blank project. Something you can also do. The last option right here, which is a Stoplight CLI, is a CLI command. So you can run your terminal, push docs into Stoplight using a command. Very often, users who do this will actually add it to a CI pipeline. So it will be automated. Now, it requires that you build that automation yourself. This is more likely something that you'll want if you already have that in place. But we want to make this platform, build it in such a way where it will be attractive to people who are using different methods. And if you're open for a given project to use the native Git integration, I'd recommend that you do that. Very quick, I'll create a blank project so just so that you see that flow. New project and create it. And when I do that, I'm brought into this editor. It's called Studio. And frankly, it's one of the strongest value points that our platform has to offer. You'll see why. So if I wanted to add a new API, I can click on this add button here, or as we're getting started, I'll click on API and we can just call this new API. This will be a quick test, right? So we have Open API v3, and yeah, let's stay with YAML. So just create that file. And for learning purposes, if you're creating a new file, we'll include a few endpoints in there so that you have something that could be representative of what your API will look like, right? So we have a get operation, a patch. Here's a user model. Now, you don't have to keep these if you don't want. You could always delete them. So that would be my third tip, is if you don't want to keep the examples, you could delete them very easily right here with the UI. And just to make sure that you're clear about what this is doing, under the hood, we have an Open API file. It's Open API v3. You're welcome to write it manually in the JSON or YAML, but this form editor is abstracting that file and making it visual. So somebody who knows about REST APIs can come in here and say, all right, well, I'm going to add a server to this project, and I don't want to worry about the underlying syntax or anything like that. It's just going to slow me down. So let's go ahead and start documenting it. And you'll see an update on the preview here on the right-hand side. Once you're happy with what you've done, and this is a brand new project, you can click on the push button here at the top, and it will actually create a repo for you. So my fourth tip is, if you're creating a project on Stoplight that's new, go ahead and create a repo for that. If you don't want to keep it, you could always remove the repo, but that means that your files will be there. You can invite other people to collaborate with you and save their work on Git. So yeah, it's pretty neat functionality right there. You can push a project to Git like you see in this example. Now, let me show you documentation that is even more robust. I'll just get rid of this project real quick. And this example is more realistic. So this is going to be more representative of what a solid set of API docs would look like. And to get started, you'll notice that we have search functionality, and it says search Cloud Home, the name of this API. So that means that you'll be searching within the scope of this project only. So great to have search functionality that's project specific. And this first item that you see on screen now is a article. It's Markdown. It's basically GitHub Markdown. People are familiar. Many people are familiar with what that looks like. So it'll support text and images, and also have nicely rendered code samples. If you want to document a sample request, you can do so. We've extended GitHub Markdown to make it more API specific. So there's some content, API content blocks that we've added, like this request maker. And you can configure this request maker so it has predictable behavior. If a user clicks send, then they will always be sending a request against a mock server that we host for you, which will return this example. So it's a nice way to make your docs interesting and interactive, is add a request maker, and you can either have it use the actual server or use a mock server. Lastly, if you need to describe any of the data, we will also render it nicely along with any examples, such as what you see on the screen here. So Markdown, very often, and maybe that's a fifth tip, very often you will want to complement the Open API with additional information a description of use cases, an intro, all of that is very useful. So Stoplight Studio and our platform is very good for that as well. The APIs themselves will always have a name. This one's called devices. So if I click on devices, it will bring me to an overview. Every API will have an overview, and this is meant to be a space where it describes the API at a high level and gives people contact information, servers, security, just high level stuff. It will also give you this export button. So very often people will need the Open API for testing. Let's say you're an internal user, you need to run some testing. So you need that Open API. Now you can go to the repo if you want. You can also grab it from here. If you click on original, you'll notice this is a file you can download, and it's also available on this URL. There's other options in there, like being able to fully dereference the file. Very useful. You won't have to do it yourself. The endpoints themselves will be grouped, right? So this one's grouped under a devices tag. And this first endpoint is called list devices. It is a way to get a list of devices that are hosted on Cloud Home. So we have a nice looking description in Markdown. This would be the path. This indicates that we have a path parameter, but the parameters are described in more depth here at the bottom. We're using an API key, so that's how you're securing the API. Here we have the account ID path parameter you saw earlier, described more thoroughly, and the same thing for query parameters and headers. So everything that you see here in this section is informative. How should my user interact with this endpoint? What responses should they expect? This is a response with the examples, and notice that this example will be used later, right? This is an example that was written in the into the Open API file. They'll be useful later, and you can describe as many responses as you want with the Open API. So either you're exporting Open API from your code base or you're writing it as a contract. It's a format that will definitely let you be very thorough, and might be useful for developers in different stages. So you might as well be thorough. The right-hand side of the docs are interactive. That's a request maker you saw earlier. So the different parameters that we are using, such as query parameters, have default values, so they're already filled in. But the API key is empty, so I'll add values for that. And likewise for the path, I'll just add a fake account. Now this server doesn't exist. It's just a demo at this point. It's just an API that I've described, but I can simulate what the API will do. I can mock it. So if I enable mocking, the URL has been replaced with the mock URL that we host for you, right? That's just what this enable mocking does, is replace the URL in the request maker. And you'll see this is pretty neat. So if I'm a docs consumer and I want to understand how this API will behave, I can mock it and say I want to request a 200 response with that example called devices. If I click send, that's what I'm getting back as a response, is that fixed example. Another option that you could choose to do is to request a 200 response, but have it dynamically generate a response. If I click send now, boom, now all of this is dynamic text, numbers, booleans, dates. So it's using your schema. If your schema is provided with useful validation, then we will take that into account as well. Any regex patterns, for example. And yeah, this would be an option that your users will have. Now, it's nice to make requests in the UI. It's definitely nice. It helps me understand what I'm doing. But what if I want to make an external request? You can come to CodeGen and make a request in curl. I like HTTP, so let me make a quick request for you to watch on screen. Let me just go to my terminal right here, and I'll plug that in there. If I hit enter, I'm getting a dynamic array of objects from that mock server. Right, and it's actually writing in the values that I had selected with the request maker with this UI. You'll notice here's the API key. So it's simulating what it's doing, but it's available externally. If you have that need, it's called a split stack development. If you have a need to use a mock server so that the front end team can start building the front end, then they'll likely be doing this. But they might be working with different languages, right? So if they have a JavaScript project, then they can generate a request right here. All of this is generated, by the way, using the Open API. You won't have to maintain and write it separately. Very often that's can be tedious, but this is generated for you. So easy to deploy, easy to maintain. Same thing for the mock server. All we need is Open API, and the mock server will be accurate and up to date. So great. This is what you will have when you add an Open API file into the Stoplight platform. You'll have documentation. You will have a request maker with automatically hosted mock servers and generated and automatically generated requests. Lastly, what I'll describe right here is models. If you add any models to your project, either in the Open API file or as standalone schemas, then you'll be able to export them as well if users need them and describe them. So let's have a look at the Studio Editor actually for this project and see what it looks like so we can experience a project that's rich in Studio. What you're seeing is the devices file, which is the Open API here on screen. And I'm actually editing the project in the browser. So that's another benefit of using that native Git integration. I can use my Git user to edit this project, push to Git, and do so from the browser. So this is simplifying Open API. If I wanted to deprecate this endpoint, very visual, you'll get a tag right here, and you won't have to mess around with the underlying YAML or JSON. You're welcome to do so if you want. This will just make you a lot faster. And if you have a team that's new to Open API, it's going to significantly lower that learning curve. Here I'm reusing a query parameter. And let's work with some data so you get an idea of what editing a model would look like. You'll see that for this 200 response, let me bring in the preview. I'm using a models devices.v1.json file right here. It's an array of references to this file. So this is actually a file. I could reuse something that's available in the Open API spec if I wanted to, or use this project as a scope, which will give me a dropdown and let me use standalone JSON schemas that are available in the project. So you may not be aware of this, or you haven't done it yet, but it's a great way of saying, hey, we want to use JSON schema to describe our models rather than the Open API and have them exist as standalone files because we use them elsewhere. We use these models elsewhere. And there could be a lot of reasons why this makes sense, but it also makes it very easy for you to reuse them across APIs. So this is what the model looks like. And if I wanted to add a new field, it's also very visual. Change its type, add additional properties. So you can give a few default values and examples in there. Make this required and describe it. So you're seeing these updates here on the right-hand side. I can deprecate this. So deprecate it as soon as it was made and also do something that's more complicated. So what if we add a one of keyword? Let's call this data, and I'll actually nest a few objects within that keyword. Sorry, I got rid of that. So we add an object in there. And these will be references to other files here on the repo. So this is the file structure in the repository. So I'll add accounts and I will add users. Now, when you get this as a response, you will either get accounts or users. So it's actually been able to describe something that was pretty complex with just a few clicks. A lot better than having to do it manually. Definitely a lot faster. And well, we're going to need to provide a new example for this update. So if I click on plus example, it's filling in a bunch of stubs, and I can provide values for all of that if I wanted to. And here's that one of accounts. Brought that in as well. So we can call this devices plus accounts. Very neat. So that's data in Studio. That's schemas. Very, very neat. If I click on push, like you saw earlier, here's a comparison of those updates. That's what I've added to the schema. And I can push the master or create a new branch. I want to also briefly talk about the style guide since we're here. What is a style guide? Sometimes a style guide could be a document that you have in a, and let me clear this out real quick, that you have on some sort of internal portal that says APIs at our company should look like this. And that's great to have, but it requires people to read it. And then how do you enforce it? You can complement that sort of documentation with a technology called Spectral that will validate the open API and run it against a rule set to let you know if there's any mistakes or any warnings. This Spectral validation engine is built into Studio. Out of the box, it will encourage people to write higher quality docs. So let you know, hey, you're missing a description and you're missing a tag, and yeah, you need an operation ID. So it's encouraging people to write higher quality documentation. But you can be opinionated as an organization and say, our path should use Pascal case, and we must support application JSON. So if you wanted to enforce rules like that, then you can look at a spectral file and add it to your project that will contain these custom rules. We have a webinar that has a deep dive into this subject. If you feel this is something you'd like to learn more about, I'd encourage you to look at that content on our website or join it live next time that we run it. But it's very useful. So if you're thinking, okay, Studio is going to help my designers write open API, and me as an architect or somebody that is thinking more strategically, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page and doing things according to a standard. This is a great way to enforce it. In Studio, you can run it in your terminal and CI pipelines. You can add it to a web action on Git so that it lints on a pull request, and it's one of the checks that it would have to pass when you're before you merge it in. So very useful tool. There's always a bit more depth that you could go into when it comes to the Studio product, and this is mostly the introduction to the subject, but it's great for writing Markdown as well. So this is where I wrote my Markdown. If you have any technical writers on your team, they can benefit from Studio. They can save their edits to a branch and then have somebody approve those changes on the documentation. But it essentially makes using Git a lot more approachable for those different roles. And keeping in mind the amount of time we have on the clock, last thing I'd like to show you is the versioning. So this ties in very well with branches and the need to review not only file changes, but also the docs. So you'll notice that I'm looking at these versions right here. We have V1 and V2, and we have unpublished. This is there so that if we go into the settings for the project, you'll notice that I have these versions here, and develop is not published. It's meant so that I could do two things. One of them is version my docs. So if a docs consumer needs V2 of my API, they can find it and look at those docs. But then as an editor, somebody that has a certain user role in the platform, I can open this project and in the pull request approve changes or file changes, but then come and do a visual inspection on that unpublished branch and look at it from the point of view of a docs consumer and say, all right, this is good to go. I approve it. Let's publish it. Or let's approve that merge into main. So very open-ended tools are meant so that you can implement them as it makes sense to you as an organization. And to close, what I think will be useful for you to know about a workspace is if you're an admin, make sure you're familiar with this members tab. I have a good number of members right here. And so make sure that you know what these different roles can do. We support different types of users on the platform, and everything that's viewer or above is considered internal. So they'll be able to look at internal documentation, whereas a guest can't. A guest is meant more for like a third party, like a partner or a customer that only needs access to a subset of docs. And on top of that, a viewer will not be able to use Studio or add new projects, right? So they're a read-only user that's internal, whereas the maker can. So make sure that you know the difference between all of those, and you can whitelist an email domain if you wanted to and have a customer.com, and they sign an NDA. We know who they are, so if they log in, they'll get a guest user, right? So know that you can set up that type of functionality. And there's more content that could be said about managing a workspace, for example, around customizing it with a custom themes and domains. But we also have a webinar that talks about that. It's called Kickstarting Your Workspace. I'd encourage you to join that webinar if you'd like to learn more about how can I brand the workspace and make it look more like my website. And other than that, I think it would be good that give you enough time so we can answer any questions that is in the Q&A. If we have any, it looks like we have a few.
So Vladimir asked, if you forgot to push changes to Git, will you get any notification or warning? Will your changes be lost if you navigate away, etc.?
You will get a warning, and you may have missed it when I was in there. It's letting me know, hey, can you push this project to the workspace or to Git? And it's encouraging you to use Git, mainly because if you do not use Git, then it would not be possible for other people to collaborate with you on those files. They will only be available to you if you're using that Studio in the web editor. So those files will be stored on your browser. I would definitely encourage you to set up a Git integration for your project.
Awesome. And we have one from registration too, but does Stoplight have the ability to easily document SOAP APIs in addition to REST APIs?
We are currently only able to document, we're only able to work with the Open API standard. We have plans to support other formats in the future, but those will, if you go to our public roadmap, you'll be able to learn more about those plans. But we're thinking more about async API and GraphQL, and that would be very long term, by the way. But those are our aspirations.
Yeah, is it possible to have the documentation files integrated in the API repo instead of creating a standalone doc repo?
Oh, it's definitely possible. That's definitely something you can do. Now, there's a file that you can add in Studio if you click on the plus button to add files, and it's called a configuration file. And Studio has a default behavior, well, where it will look at a folder or a repo and analyze it so that it can determine what is Open API, what are schemas, what is Markdown, and whatever it finds it will think is documentation. So if you want to configure that behavior, you can tell us where to find the Open API, where to find the models, where to find the Markdown, and also what folders to ignore so we don't even look at anything that's in there. I've had a customer that was generating a lot of Open API for an SDK generator, and that doesn't need to be documented. So he added that folder to the exclude property.
Nice. Awesome. There's one from John. Do you have plans to add a graph visualization of the schema?
We do have plans to support that. And I wouldn't mind actually showing you what that looks like real quick. Since we're here,
Okay.
we just go back into the workspace because I think this is something that you will enjoy. So this Explore tab is the catalog that will organize your docs and make them searchable, but also be able to apply filters on what you're looking at. So it's a catalog of your API docs, and we'll be able to graph dependencies. And what these dependencies are is basically references. Say you have a list devices endpoint that's referencing this device's model, and this is actually being used by other endpoints in the same API. It will let you look at them and then navigate that graph of relationships right here. This is the API itself. So yeah, we can definitely do that.
Thanks for everyone for attending this webinar. If you ever need any help beyond this, you can reach out to us at sales@stoplight.io. And if you just have general support questions, you can go to support@stoplight.io. Try not to twist my tongue again there. So thanks for everyone. I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for coming. Have a good day.